Before steel beams held up America, there was a wood so dense it would not rot, so hard that bugs could not eat it, and so strong it built the most powerful navy on Earth. It covered 90 million acres of the American South. It floored the homes of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. It planked the decks of the USS Constitution, a warship so resilient that British cannonballs literally bounced off its hull. And in less than 40 years, the timber industry cut it all down. Then they deliberately planted something weaker in its place. This is the story of the wood that built America, and the corporate decision that ensured it would never grow back. Welcome to Nature's Lost Vault. The archive opens in the coastal lowlands of Virginia, the year 1607. English settlers step off their ships and look up. Towering above them, stretching from the Atlantic coast to eastern Texas, stands the largest continuous forest on the North American continent. Longleaf pine. Column after column of trees rising 150 feet straight into the sky, 4 feet wide at the base, each one centuries old. The settlers had never seen anything like it. Back in England, the great forests were gone, burned for charcoal, cleared for farms, forcing the crown to import ship timber from Scandinavia at enormous cost. But here the wood was everywhere. Longleaf pine was so straight, so tall, and so strong that the British Crown immediately declared it property of the king. Royal surveyors walked the forests, identifying every tree wider than 24 inches in diameter and burning a broad arrow into its bark. Anyone who cut one without permission faced prosecution. The colonists responded by tarring and feathering the surveyors. Many historians trace the first true sparks of American rebellion not to the Boston Tea Party, but to those attacks on royal timber agents deep in the Carolina forests. The Crown understood what the colonists would soon learn for themselves. Longleaf pine was not ordinary wood. A longleaf seedling spends its first 7 years doing almost nothing visible. It sits at ground level, looking like a clump of grass. But underground, it is building, driving a taproot deep into the earth, storing energy, establishing an anchor that will hold for centuries. When the tree finally bolts upward, it grows fast and perfectly straight, no branches until the very crown. Then it slows down. 1 inch of diameter every 30 years. That slowness is the secret. It takes an entire century for the tree to form its dense inner core, the heartwood. By the time it does, the wood is saturated with resin, the tree's own immune system, a natural preservative that fills every cellular cavity. The timber becomes something closer to a mineral than ordinary wood. It scores 1,290 on the Janka hardness scale, harder than red oak. It does not rot. It does not warp. Insects cannot penetrate it. Water cannot permeate it. Builders who worked with true heart pine said it was the closest thing to stone that still weighed like wood. 4 out of every 5 houses built in Georgia, the Carolinas, and Florida from the colonial era through the 1800s were framed in longleaf heart pine. The factories of the Industrial Revolution were held up by its beams. The textile mills of the South ran on it. The wharves of Savannah and Charleston were piled with it. America's entire industrial rise was structurally held together by a forest that had spent thousands of years becoming nearly indestructible. Then the railroads arrived. Before the mid-1800s, loggers were limited to areas near rivers, dragging timber by oxen teams to float it downstream to coastal mills. That limitation protected the interior, but rail lines pushed deep into untouched forest, and logging crews followed. They built portable sawmill towns, cut around the clock, stripped the land bare, and moved on. The industry called it cut out and get out. there was no plan for what came after. 90 million acres of ancient forest, a forest that had taken millennia to grow, were reduced to stumps in less than 40 years. By 1920, the original longleaf pine was functionally gone. Less than 2% of the original range remained. And here is where the story takes its darkest turn. The timber companies had a problem. They had the mills, the rail lines, the crews, and the capital, but nothing left to cut. They had to replant, and they had a choice. They could plant longleaf pine, which would take a century to mature, but produce the same incomparable, indestructible wood that had built the country. Or they could plant loblolly pine, a completely different species, fast-growing and harvestable in 25 years. They chose loblolly. Across millions of acres of former longleaf range, they planted rows of fast, weak wood. Wood that warps when it dries. Wood that splits when it gets wet. Wood with almost no natural resin, no density, no real durability. Wood that bends under structural load and rots when exposed to weather. In a financial system built around quarterly returns and 20-year contracts, the industry made a deliberate calculation. They sacrificed quality to capture the market, and then they made sure every future carpenter, contractor, and home builder in America grew up knowing only this wood and grew up accepting warped framing and bowing lumber as simply how wood behaves. Walk into any lumber yard in America today. The pine on the shelf is loblolly. It is green and wet, heavy with moisture. It will slowly lose as it dries. It will shrink. It will bow. Framers account for this. Builders plan around it. Everyone accepts it. That acceptance is the product of a decision made in the 1920s. Real heart pine does not warp. Beams cut from longleaf trees in the 1880s and built into factory floors are still perfectly true, perfectly flat, 140 years later. When old textile mills, cotton gins, and warehouses are demolished across the South today, the workers pulling them apart find something extraordinary. They find structural beams that look like they were milled last week, perfectly straight, honey amber in color, and nearly impossible to drill without a carbide bit. Reclaimers haul them out and sell them for $15 a board foot, 12 times the price of what is at the lumber yard. Salvage crews also drag the river bottoms with sonar, hunting for longleaf logs that sank during the logging drives of the 1800s. The same resin that made heart pine impervious to rot made it impervious to submersion. Those logs have been sitting in the mud for 150 years without decaying. They get raised, milled, and sold to people restoring historic homes. The wood that built the country is now so rare it has to be dredged from riverbeds or salvaged from dying buildings. Conservation groups have begun replanting longleaf across the southeast. They know the timeline with no illusions. A tree planted today will not produce true heart pine for 100 years. The people planting them will not live to harvest them. But that is exactly the point. The original longleaf forests grew because time was allowed to pass. The timber industry did the math and decided patience was not profitable. They chose a product that lasts 25 years over a product that lasts 2 centuries. They chose a product that rots because a product that rots guarantees a repeat customer. The people replanting longleaf today are making the opposite calculation. They are planting for people who have not been born yet. They are saying that some things are worth building even if you will never see them finished. The heart pine is still out there, under the floors of old buildings, at the bottom of southern rivers, in a handful of protected groves where trees old enough to be irreplaceable are still standing, and in the ground, growing one ring at a time, waiting for a generation that decides quality is worth more than speed. 1 inch of diameter, 30 years of growth. A century before it becomes what it was always meant to be. The industry chose not to wait. We are still paying for that choice every time a new floor warps, every time a beam bows, every time someone nails together wood that will not outlast the mortgage on the house it frames. The knowledge of what wood can be is not lost. It is standing in a few quiet groves, sitting on the bottom of old rivers, and slowly growing in the dark beneath the soil. If this vault opened something for you, subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault and hit the bell. Every like and every share keeps this knowledge alive. The next vault opens soon.